Today, I want to show you how to create this slider. It's packed with features like a parallax effect, a unique style to highlight the current slide, transition animations, and best of all, the video asset starts, stops, and resets depending on whether or not it's active. Webflow alone can't do this, so today I'll teach you how to use a JavaScript library to extend what's possible. This is the key to making your website stand out. By the end of this, you'll learn how to use and implement any JavaScript library, even if you don't know how to code. So let's jump right in. Here we are in Swiper's beautiful homepage, so Swiper.js.com. Once you've worked with one library, you can pretty much navigate your way around other libraries. They're always kind of structured the same way as far as how you go about using them. What you want to do is look for where it says get started. The get started is nice because it gives you the bare minimum to get up and running with the JavaScript library. For the most part, all of these libraries are going to have an install from npm. We don't want that. We want to keep scrolling until we see something called CDN. Use Swiper from CDN, so perfect. This is what we're looking for. CDN just stands for Content Delivery Network, and all you really need to know about that is that someone has already uploaded all the files we need to use this library somewhere out there on the internet. And all we need to do on our end is copy and paste the links to these things so we can reference them and use them. Just pay attention to the file name. Sometimes there's more than one file that you need to be, pasting into your Webflow site. Here for Swiper, there's a CSS file. You can see here, .css, and there's also a .js file, a JavaScript. The reason why we need to pay attention to that is because any .css files, you almost always want to put those on the header, and any .js files, you want to put them before the closing of the body. So let's do that right now. Let me copy this .css file, go back to our Webflow project, hit the page, settings, scroll down, and because again, this is a CSS file, let's put that in the header tag, okay? Now let's go back and grab the .js file. So here we go, we grab the .js file, and that one we want to put at the closing of the body tag. This is just kind of a best practices for performance because you want all of the functionality to actually load last and you want content to load first. Make sure you're reading the documentation because they might be specific and want you to load that stuff on the header. For today, we're just taking the easy route here. Cool, so now we have that all installed. Because we're gonna start dropping elements onto our canvas, let me just add divs in here so that we can position our actual Swiper slider nicely centered in the middle. So this doesn't really have anything to do with getting Swipers up and running. This is strictly just to format our page for our tutorial here. First thing I think that I'll need is to just add a main wrapper class. And then in here, let's add a section and call this section CMS Swiper Slider. That sounds good. And then inside of this, I am going to add another div, and this one will be a utility div called display flex vertical. And in here, I will just add a vertical flex on here, and then add a combo class of is full height, and add a height of 100 dph. Now we can drop our collection in here. So let's just type collection list, drop the collection list. Let's open up our navigator so we can see all of the layers here. Of course, we don't have a collection yet. We haven't set that up. We will set that up in just a second. So going back to our Swiper page, here's how the HTML should be laid out. We need a parent div called Swiper with a class equals Swiper. That's what that means. Inside of that, we need another div with a class of Swiper wrapper, right? And then inside of the Swiper wrapper, we actually have all of our slides. So how does this translate into Webflow? Well, if you go back in here, which one is the parent? Well, the parent is this collection list wrapper, right? So this collection list wrapper, we'll call this Swiper because that's the class that it wants us to call that, right? And then inside of it, we have Swiper wrapper. So let's actually just copy that. And in the inside of Swiper, Swiper wrapper. Perfect. So here, this is actually our Swiper slide. So instead of us having to keep adding Swiper slide, Webflow is generating all of these Swiper slides through our CMS. So here we'll do Swiper slide. Perfect. So now we have the same structure as we're seeing here. And you've also just Worked with HTML, good job. The next thing that we need to do, just best practice, is add a combo class to these things. Because if for some reason on your website, I mean, in this tutorial, we're just working on it on this page, but I highly recommend to always add a combo class just so you're not manipulating the base swiper classes. So in this swiper, we are just gonna go ahead and call this is video slider. So you can add whatever combo class you have, you know, if this is a team slider for some reason, you could do is team, you know, so it could totally be up to you. So we'll do that for all of them. Is video slider, and then the slide is video slider. So now all of these things are just related to our video slider, which is what we're working on right now. The next step here that it's saying is to specify width and height for our swiper element. The swiper element doesn't really come with its own width and height. You have to specify that yourself. So that's easy enough to do in Webflow. So we go back to our swiper element and we need to just set a width and height. We'll keep the height auto, that's okay. And the width, we want it to be 100 viewport width. Okay, I'm just gonna have that span across the page. Let's go back to the documentation to see what's next. Initialize swiper. This pretty much just means put all of this code so that Swiper knows to talk to these particular divs that we've created in our project. So let's go into our pages, open up the settings one more time, scroll all the way down to before the end of the body tag, and drop the code in here. I'm just gonna skip a line. So as you can see, it's all just white text here. Webflow is looking for an HTML. We've just basically pasted gibberish as far as Webflow is concerned. So we have to tell Webflow this is JavaScript. So to do that, there is a tag that we have to type in here called script. As with any HTML element, it always has to end. So the closing tag is basically script, but instead of just starting with the S, it starts with this slash here. Now that we've wrapped our JavaScript code into these HTML tags called scripts, the browser knows that this is in fact JavaScript code, and so it'll execute it correctly. Now, you don't need to know how to write JavaScript code, but you do need to understand what these lines do and what's kind of happening here. So the very first thing here, the only thing you need to know about this is that we're creating this new thing called Swiper, which is this. And we're telling the browser that this new thing Swiper is an instance, a new Swiper right here, of this code. So it's like kind of relating it back to this code. That's how you can loosely think about it. There's a lot more happening there, but it's kind of how you can think about it, right? So now all of this stuff after it is now talking to this Swiper bundle minified JS file, this JS file, right? And this is the Swiper library. This is the core code of it. So all of this stuff is talking to that. So we've connected it. So now how do we make this code talk to our HTML or our Webflow page? Well, we have this thing right here, .swiper. This means that look for this class, a class name called .swiper, and attach all of these functionalities and settings onto that class. As you recall, we've created a class here called Swiper based on Swiper's documentation, right? And that's why it's so important to make sure that you have your HTML layouts correct, because this is how the library kind of finds the elements and start manipulating those elements and attaching features. So we have this Swiper item here. So now our JavaScript library knows that it's this class name called Swiper, and that's what's related to all of these things. The combo class of isVideoSlider is the thing that's going to target it more accurately. This is why it's best practice to always attach a combo class to it so that we're targeting the right Swiper and we're not affecting a whole bunch of Swiper instances. Even if you only have one instance of it, I like to just do it just because it's best practice. Yes, it does add some bloat to the code, but whatever. And so, okay, how do we do that? So grab this guy, and as you recall, and what you can see here, there is a dot in front of the class name. So because this is a combo class, we don't have to do a space or anything like that. Just immediately after this R, type dot, and then paste isVideoSlider in here. And so now this is basically that, right? So now we're very accurate in saying, okay, this new instance of Swiper only affects this exact parent element, okay? Cool. So now the browser knows that there's a thing called Swiper, right? And this thing called Swiper is linked to the JavaScript library we've imported using the script tag up here, right? And also it's linked to this style sheet, this bunch of styles and stuff that comes with it. Great. And now this library knows that somewhere on the page, there is a div containing all of the stuff that I know how to use. And that thing is called Swiper is video slider, right? So now everything is kind of connected. Okay, great. But how do we actually start using this thing? What should we do next? Now, the next part of the code is basically saying, all right, so you're a JavaScript library, you can do millions and millions of different things, but I want to specify only a specific set of instructions for you to do. And that is what goes in here. These are very specific instructions for the Swiper library to do. So these are kind of, you can think of them as customization, settings. It's really called parameters, so you should start calling them parameters. But that's what all of this stuff is. Now, you technically don't need to set anything up here. It's just the main initialization that's required for Swiper to just start happening. But what's going to happen is if you remove all of this stuff and just have, you know, the initialization bit, what's going to happen is you're going to inherit all of the default slider properties that Swiper comes with. So that's the same as just dragging a new element of a slider on Webflow and like not touching any of the styles, not adding interactions, not doing anything to it, right? You're just getting kind of a vanilla, you know, default Swiper slider, which actually is a great slider, and you know, you can go ahead and use that if you want. But for our case, we are going to be customizing the shit out of it, and so we want to mess around with the parameters. Okay, immediately following this kind of opening bracket here is our parameters. There's a couple of things happening here though. It's not as simple as just like these are all parameters. There's a bunch of stuff going on here. Always make use of the comments, read the comments, which are these things, and use them yourself, because that'll dramatically help get your head wrapped around this code, and when you return to your project a year from now, you still know what the code does, right? Comments are literally just notes that you leave behind on what this chunk of code does. There's two ways to write a comment. One is inline, which is these two slashes. And when you're doing a comment like this, it's only one line. If I go to the next line, this is now being interpreted as JavaScript. So you don't want that. If for some reason you're writing a huge novel of a comment and you want to make use of different lines and do stuff like this, you would have to do it by having a slash and then an asterisk to open it. And then you can do whatever you want in here. And you can see if you can even put code in here. So let's say, oh, I actually want to save this code for later or something like that. Or you want to say this makes it vertical, right? But then you want to adjust some things here. You can do that, and that's a good use case for a multi-line comment. So you can put code in here. This code will not execute. It'll just be there as a note. Okay, sweet. Let's read the comments. So first, we see here optional parameters. So it's just basically giving us examples of what you can pretty much do, right? So it's giving us direction and loop. The biggest takeaway here, and again, this goes for any library, is when they're giving you sample code, is it at least gives you an idea on how it's supposed to be written out for it to work, right? And this is just standard JavaScript, but think of it more as a template, right? And that's really just coding. How you can kind of dissect this is this word is a parameter, right? And then you need a colon, a space, and then anything in quotes is the value of that parameter. And if you have more parameters or more things, you separate them using commas, right? So here we have a direction parameter and it's setting it to vertical. If we switch this to horizontal, then now the direction of our swiper is going horizontally. The next parameter here, you can guess it's loop. All that means is it's looping and we're setting it to true. Let's cut to the chase here. Where is all of this stuff coming from? How do we know what the parameters are, what the values are? You know, can we just type whatever we want, right? So this is where the documentation really comes in. The page that we've been on is just kind of a get started guide. Go into the API documentation or just try and find where everything is kind of just laid out. So looking at the left side here, going all the way down here and skipping over to parameters. So this table right here shows you what the name of the parameter is. So that's how we were able to know about direction, loop. You can't just type any name. It has to come from this list. And each parameter, it has a very specific type. And what is a type? That's a type of value that you can put onto it. So because it has a default value, right? And because you can basically run this thing without any parameters on your code, it's just going to inherit these default values. So here, as you remember in a sample, it was set to vertical and we changed it to horizontal. If we were gonna make that change, we can actually just delete it, right? We don't need it because that's the default value. It's just going to inherit it. Only write JavaScript in here if the parameter is different than the default. So what parameters do we need? Well, let's take a look at our final product here. You can see that there is a cursor change that's happening here. I'm going from an arrow into this little glove icon, which is a grab. And I'm able to like click and drag the slides in that way. So that's a functionality that we're gonna have to implement. The second big thing that's happening here is that there's this really sweet parallax effect going on. So you can see as I'm dragging or changing slides, you can see that the video asset in the background kind of gets revealed. You see a little bit more of it as you're kind of moving the container. Similarly, the text is also moving at a different rate than everything else. The other thing that you're not seeing is I'm using my mouse pad to swipe up and down. You'll also notice that there's only 2 slides every time we change views. So that's another parameter that we'll want to have turned on. So let's go back to Webflow to see what we have. So first, we are going horizontal. We don't need that because it's the default. So let's get rid of that. There is no looping that's happening, right? Like we just kind of end there. We can go ahead and get rid of that as well. Let's remove the comments for now because we really don't need that. We don't have pagination. We don't have navigation arrows. And finally, we do not have scroll bars. Okay, so what do we have? Let's start with, and let's just create here our parameters, just so we know. Let's start with the slides per view. So we want 2 slides per view. The next is I do want to specify a speed. So this is the rate of change of slide changing. Then we want grab cursor. And again, you can find all of these in the documentation. Mouse wheel. Mouse wheel. We want that set to true. And finally, our sweet parallax effect also set to true. Let's stick with that for now and hit save. So we don't have any collections. We haven't set up our CMS or anything like that. So we can't really test out whether or not this gibberish we're typing here even works. So for that, let's go ahead and quickly set up our collections. Let's take a look at the final product. So there's 2 pieces of content for every entry that we're seeing here, for every slide. A video background and text here, a little title. We're gonna need to create those 2 fields in the CMS. Let's go ahead and do that. Clicking on the CMS collections, hit plus button, create new collection. Let's just go and title this one video slider, I guess. Create collection. Oh, before we do that, let's also start setting up our fields. So for the title, we can just keep it simple, use the name as the title, but we will need a custom field. And here I'm gonna use a plain text for our video. Let me just zoom out so we can kind of see what's going on here. Custom fields, this one will be our video asset and hit save. Now you might be wondering, why didn't I use video link field here? Well, I'm going to show you right now. So let's go ahead and create that collection. Let's not add any items just yet, but just let's take a look at this. These video backgrounds here they're just that. They're video backgrounds. They're not video players or anything like that. They're not YouTube videos. Doesn't have all of the controls in the UI you would see on a Vimeo or YouTube video. You have 2 options. One, you could upload a video as a background in Webflow to host the video. And the way you would do that is you would ideally kind of go in and create a new page, videos or something, and you wouldn't really publish this page. This strategy here is really just so you can host the videos on your Webflow project. It's a little bit cumbersome. So the way you would go about this is you would add a background video element, and then from here you would upload your video, and then Webflow will process it and actually upload it onto their own servers. And then there's this video1.mp4, your file name. There's a little icon here that you can actually click to get you this raw kind of URL address here, and that's what you would be able to then use if you go back into where your collection is. That's what you're going to be able to use when we create a new one, and that's what you can paste onto here. This is how you can grab a raw video file, host it on Webflow, or at least on Webflow servers, and be able to use that video without any worry about YouTube or anything like that. The downside to this approach is that Webflow is pretty aggressive with their optimization and how they compress their videos, which is a good thing, but sometimes you just want that file size, right? So if you want to retain that file size and have a higher quality video, you're going to want to host your videos elsewhere. Now, you can't just upload them on Google Drive or Dropbox or anything like that. You need an option. I believe Dropbox might have an option for this. You want your file name to be a .mp4. You don't want some crazy Google Drive URL or anything like that. You need it to be .mp4, and how you can test that is whatever video or whatever URL you have. If you open up a new tab and paste that on there, the video should appear right there. In our case right now, it's not uploaded yet, so it's not kind of appearing, but the video should appear right here, right? And by uploading it to Webflow, it's kind of annoying because let's just get out of there. You're going to now have to maintain this page that just has like a repository of all the videos, which I guess is fine. Client-wise, it's not great, but that's one way you can go about it. I like to host my videos on AWS, on Amazon Web Services. You can just find any hosting platform out there and upload your videos that way. For today, if you want, just create a new page, call it whatever you want, and create some background videos and upload your videos there, grab the URL and put that into that field. All right, so let's go back here. Like I mentioned, I do have my own AWS repo, so I'm going to be using that. Going back into our CMS collection, let's start populating this real quick. So the first one, I had some AI title generated here, Cascades Ethereal Secrets. All right, so let me just populate these. And there we go. We have all of our placeholder content in here with these fancy titles. The one thing you can do if you want to control the order of your slides, you can go ahead and also create another field of number and just call this order. Right? And then just hit save, and now you have your order. So now we can really match the order that we see here, which is Cascade and then Myth. So here we can say that's 1, and then Myth is 2, and then Nature's Elegance Revealed is 3, and then the last one is 4. There we go. So now that's all there. We're still not seeing anything. That's because we have to actually connect it to the source. So go ahead and double click the collection and just select video sliders. And now we see all of our entries are in here. All right, so what's next? Well, we got to build out our slides. We already know we need to embed this video in some way, and I'll show you how in just a second. And we need the title, but there is a fun thing happening here in that the videos are scaling in size, but maintaining their aspect ratio as I resize my browser. Okay, so that's a little bit of a magic. How do we do that? Well, there's a fun trick. So let's call this video embed container because that's what it is. And let's set a padding top of 60% and a width. This one, I'm going to set this width to 100%. And then you want the position to be relative. Just set the overflow to none and the fit to cover. The next thing to achieve this effect is we need to now add our embed element, which is our video. So this embed element is going to be some custom code that goes in here. We're going to need to use a video tag, and let's just end the video tag like that. And then within this video tag, we need to specify a source. And with source tags, they're kind of written in that way. So in this video tag, we're gonna add a class in here, just like that, called video asset, because we need to control the specific styles for this to get this whole aspect ratio responsive thing working. The next thing is with HTML tags, there's like a bunch of parameters similar to our JavaScript. And what we want is we want it to autoplay, we want it to loop, we want to just make sure it's muted. And that's it. Let's just leave it at that for now. Now, what about the source? Well, with source, we have to specify the link. So you do that by doing this little thing, and then also specifying what type of file is that, right? So we're uploading an MP4. You'll want to upload MP4s in OGG as best practice, but for this tutorial, let's just keep it simple and just have MP4. Now, what source goes in here? Well, we want it to be dynamic because this is an item. So you want to click add field here. Just make sure your cursor is over there. Add field here, and then you want to add the video asset field that we have, all right? So that's gonna load in that URL that we pasted onto that field right in here. It's exactly what we want to happen. And then you just hit save. So here are the videos, they look great. The next step to make sure that these videos resize while maintaining their aspect ratio, we need to give some values to that class we just created called video asset. I'm going to do that because I have a style guide. I'm gonna do that inside of my style guide. If you don't have a style guide, you should create a style guide. But if for some reason that's not an option for you, just create a new page, put this div in there. So I'm going to put it in the section useful utility systems. That makes sense. I'm just going to duplicate this one. This one will be called video asset because that's what we named it. And instead of it being called display inline flex, I'm going to remove that. I'm going to name this video asset. And this video asset, I'm going to give it all of these classes that I actually already have written down. You want the width to be 100 and the height to be 100%, the fit to be cover, the position to be absolute, and right now it's just kind of like on the top left. Doesn't really matter. You can make it full if you want. And I do also have a Z index of 0 here. You technically don't need that. All right, so that's good. So that's a video asset, it's been created. The reason why I'm doing this here is because, I mean, you can handwrite this if you know CSS, but I want to make sure that the class actually exists within my Webflow project. So I'm putting it in the utilities of my style guide. All right. So now, if I hit publish, hopefully Webflow will work with that class. So here it is. So it's great. And you can see as I resize, we're maintaining our aspect ratio and they look great. They're all kind of in here playing nicely one by one. So we're a little bit far off from this beauty, but it's okay because we're going to tackle that next. So our videos are all set up. The next thing is to add these lovely titles. So what we need for that is we need another div inside of the embed container. You can put this in there and we can call this video slider content. There we go. So this video slider content, because it's on top of this video, that means that I want this to be positioned absolutely so that it's not at the, after the video. So to do that, let's add some classes here that we need. I want to have a padding, first of all. Let's just do like a 2.5 rem padding. The height to be 100% and the max width to be 50 rems. And then I said we would need it absolute and the text is at the bottom. So we have this div, but no text because we haven't put a text in here yet. So let's add some headings. It is a title, so I'll use some headings. But it's not an H1. Let's just call this H2s. And let's link it to our CMS field. So get text from video sliders. It's just the name. Perfect. So now that that's there, the next thing is we do want to style this to some extent. So let's just call these, I don't know, video slider title or slide title. There we go. It is set to, let's take a look at here. It's white and it looks like I'm using Oswald. So let's go ahead and do that. Oswald should already be loaded up. Yep, great. And then it is white. Cool. What else do we need here? The size is pretty big. So let's just adjust the size here. Let's put it to 6 rem. Make it really big. Cool. All right. And let's see what else we need. That's it. I think we're good to go. Okay. So if we publish, we're going to see that it's not quite right. This guy, just because we position it at the bottom doesn't mean the items inside of it's going to be at the bottom. Because we've set the height to 100%, it's just kind of, you know, going 100% of its parent container, which is this video embed. What we actually need to do is make this into a flex, set it to vertical, and then justify it at the end. We also don't want it to be like touching the edge like that. So within the video slider content, let's add a 2.5 rem at the bottom. We want to make sure that it's inheriting the default H2 styles. This all H2 headings has a bold on it. So we don't want that. This is just from my own instance of client first, the framework I'm using. So I want to override that and put it to, let's say, normal. So now I can hit publish and then that should be good to go. Check it out again, refresh, cool. So that is much closer to what we want here. This one has a black background. So let me go into here and just change the background to black. So I'm gonna go all the way to the body and add a background black, color black. So this is why you kind of want to always be working inside of a framework, because now I don't have to write anything that's already been pre-written for me. I'm just gonna plop in an embed element right here. So just like in the page settings, we needed to wrap our JavaScript in script tags. For CSS, which is what we need to do now to achieve the styles that we want, we're gonna have to wrap it in the appropriate tag, which is style, like that. So this means that the browser will look at this. Any code that's in here is going to be CSS code. And you might be wondering, if you're not familiar, what is CSS code? This is CSS code. All the things you see under the style panel here, these are actually all CSS properties. So let's quickly jump back here. How we're going to be dimming this video like this is we're going to actually target the entire container and just reducing the opacity. That's all we're gonna be doing. So, you know, if you were in the styles panel, we're just kind of moving this opacity slider like that. So let me show you how we write that out. Now, the very first thing is here, in the same way that in the navigator, we have to like click on the right div before we can start making style adjustments, we have to do the same thing. Of course, we don't have a way to click on things, but we do have a way to target the classes, and that's why we have class names. So the first thing is I want to target the swiper slide, okay? And remember, we do have a combo class, so is video slider. So that is just targeting literally from here down, or from here, that's what I'm targeting. Hitting space pretty much means an indent, or it is a child of that, right? So that's, we're now inside of that div. I'm just going to target this one right here, which is video embed container. So now I'm ready to write my styles. And to do that, you open and close with these curly braces. Let's just give ourselves a little bit more line room here. And anything that I write in here now is going to be the property, the style property that I want for this video embed container that I'm targeting, okay? All right, so what are those properties? Well, really all we need to worry about is the opacity. So I'm just going to type in opacity, and you could easily Google what these properties are and things, right? So let's just do 0.3, and that's it. So now this video embed container has an opacity of 0.3. All right, so it's literally the same as if we went in here, click this guy, and then reduce that opacity from that slider. We're just doing it over here, so it's a little bit easier to control. The next thing is we want the active slider to be fully visible, right? Which in CSS terms, that is opacity 1, a value of 1, okay? So how do we do that? How do we target the active slide? Well, instead of having to jump into the full documentation of Swiper, because you can find it there, I already know it. I just have to add an active class. I'm not gonna do a space because this isn't nested inside of my Swiper slide. It's actually a combo class. So Swiper slide active is what it's called, and you can find this in the documentation. And then we do hit a space because video embed container is underneath that. We want the opacity to not be 0.3, we want that to be 1. So now anytime that there's a video embed container inside or nested inside of the Swiper active combo class, the opacity value of that would be 1. Let me just show you what that would look like if I hit save. We're not really gonna see it in here, but we'll need to publish. So before I refresh, it looks like that. All right, it's all published. There we go. So JavaScript essentially is anytime I move a slide, it adds an active class on the slide. So now you can literally do whatever you want CSS wise, or even JavaScript really, to the active class. So if you wanted to, let's say, zoom in, you could do that. Now you know you can target the active class. Similarly, you can target the inactive classes. You can target the previous, the next, you can target all sorts of things. All those options can be found in the documentation. So what else do we have to do? The content. We want this content to not appear. Let's open up our code editor. What we can actually do is just copy and paste this, just so we don't have to like keep typing stuff. But instead of the video embed container, we're targeting the video slider content. This div right here, can't really see it, but it's over there, right? So that is video slider content. And we want the opacity by default to be 0. So it's completely invisible. And when it is active, I wanna see it, right? So if we hit save and publish, we should see that take effect, all right? Now you see it. Now you don't. Next thing we need to do is we need to solve for how jarring the slide changes are right now. Because we've started to style and manipulate how these next and previous slides look, when we switch over to them, it kind of just snaps right away. We need to add a transition animation so that this experience can be much, much smoother. You can see here, I have some easing going on, so it's kind of fading in at a really, really nice rate, right? So let's go ahead and do that. It's actually really, really simple. So even though we specified our CSS and we've written some custom CSS in here, we can still take advantage of the Webflow UI so we don't have to write all of that code, as long as we have the right thing selected. So let's start with the video embed container itself. So in the video embed container, opening up the code we wrote once more, video embed container, we're animating the opacity, right? Or we're changing the opacity properties. So that means if we have the video embed container selected in Webflow, scroll all the way down, you'll see this little this section here called transitions. And if you hit plus, it'll open up this modal here. And what's really nice is by default, it actually, puts you to opacity. That's the most common one. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. You want to target the exact property you want to animate or transition. So here, let's just change this to, let's say 1 second. So that's 1,000 millisecond, and add an ease out. Let's do a quadratic ease out. Looks like that. And that's it. Let me just publish that before we move to the next one. And okay, so right now before I refresh, it just kind of snaps. And if I do refresh, so now it kind of fades in. It's already much nicer. Next, the text itself is kind of just jumping. We don't want that. Let's go in here and add the same transition. So go to transitions once again, opacity, let's match it to 1 second and set the easing to the quad, out quad, all right? Let's go ahead and publish that. Here we go, we refresh. Now you can see the text itself is also animating at this point. Sweet. What's next? All right, we're almost there. A couple more things that we need to take care of. You might notice that there's another really subtle, or not really that subtle, it's actually pretty big thing that's going on here, is that it's not really parallaxing. We have that sweet parallax parameter that we've set here, right? True. But what you can see here is that the image itself on the background there, or the video rather, is moving at a different rate than the slide that it's in. Similarly, the text as well is moving in a different rate. Here right now, everything's just very mechanical and moving. So how do we get that parallax in there? So going back into our code editor here, let's open that up. What we want to do, add this piece of code right here, data-swiper-parallax. You might be wondering, Miles, how did you know? Well, like always, it's in the documentation. This data attribute, so let's hit save and see what that looks like right now. Let's refresh, and as I go, you can now see that the video is finally parallaxing. But now there's an issue that just happened. You see all this black area here, and that's because there's not enough video size to achieve this cropping effect we want to be happening. So we want to make sure that our video is much wider than it currently is. We're going to want to set the video asset, right? So if we look in here, we want to set this element's width to be beyond 100%, because right now by default it's just kind of 100%, which means it's 100% of the slide, but we want it to be a little bit bigger than 100% so that there's room for this effect to take place. We can basically change the width of the video asset and specify it to be much larger than it is. So we can go in here and just have a .video asset, just write some CSS here, and specify a width of, let's just start with 150%. So now we're 150%, and let's hit publish. Cool. So now right away you see it's working. We're a little bit more zoomed in to the image, but now you can see that as I go, we're no longer seeing those black bars because there's a lot more to the video. So that takes care of that. A couple other random little things that we have to do here to get this effect. If we look here, the next video is paused. It's not playing. In our current setup, all the videos are kind of just always playing. You can leave it at that if you like, but sometimes it's a little distracting. We need to add a bit of custom JavaScript to address this. It's kind of a multi-step approach because we don't just want to pause the video. If we go to the next slide, the video plays, and if we move away, it pauses itself again, but if we come back to it, I want it to start back from the very beginning. There's a lot of stuff going on there, so we have to specify in that way. It's a little hard to tell with these placeholder assets that I have, but I do have a bit of code here that resets the video's play position back to 0. Let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like here. So going into our good old end of body tag area, we're going to paste in some custom JavaScript. Oh my God. It's a lot of stuff in here, guys. If you are using this on your own project and using different names for your classes, we always have to make sure that the class names are the same, right? So if for some reason you don't call your main swiper is video slider like I'm doing, right? Because I have in here is video slider. If you rename this to something else, let's say teams or something like that, just make sure that the JavaScript you're pasting onto your own Webflow site is the same. So this would say teams. So for our case, it's just is video slider. And you can see here right away, you should be able to loosely follow what's going on in here just by kind of reading the words and also reading what the comment says, right? So this one is saying that this chunk of code is responsible for pausing all of the videos on initialization. And we know that word because we initialize Swiper. So this just means that when Swiper is initialized, we're going to pause all of the video. We know that we're targeting the right video asset, specifically a video that has a class called video asset inside of Swiper is video slider. So it's very, very scoped in like that. Okay, and then moving down, you can kind of read through this. We also play the initial active slide. Of course, when we first load the page, we want the first slide to be playing right away, okay? So we just pasted that. Let's hit save and publish. Great, the initial slide is playing. I move to the next slide. That's playing. The next slide is not playing. So that's awesome. So we can go back and that's playing and we reset again. Sweet. Okay, so we have to solve a very unique issue here. And this issue really only happens because of the specific configuration we have, the layout, and the overall kind of design that we've chosen here. Every view, we've specified it to have 2 slides per view, right? So we're seeing 2 slides every view. This is a view, this is a view, right? We are also hijacking Swiper's defaults and applying styles and distinguishing an active slide versus an inactive slide, right? So the inactive slides, we have the video paused, we're hiding the text, it's dimmed. The active slide, everything looks like this, okay? So for a slide to be active, you have to be on it. Like it has to be the first thing in the view. So if I scroll over here, this becomes active. If I go here, it goes inactive, okay? The reason it's able to go active is because there's more slides over there. But what happens when we get to the last view? We can't go any further. There's nothing over there. So Swiper thinks it's over. And then therefore we can never attach an active slide to this guy because there's nowhere for Swiper to go. So what do? That's a weird issue, right? You can do a bunch of things. The quickest way and honestly like the most elegant way that I like to do it is to attach a little bit of JavaScript code. All it pretty much does is it appends or it adds a dummy slide at the very end. In some ways you can do this through the CMS, right? Add another slide at the end and just have it blank. I like to just do it programmatically so I don't clog up my collections. So we do this outside of this whole chunk in here. If you paste this code, it's going to attach an empty slide. So here's our Swiper slide, it's empty, at the very end of Swiper. Let's hit save, publish, and now we should be able to swipe all the way to the end. So here we go one more, and then there we go. And we're able to do this again because there's actually a slide right here. If you actually right click and inspect, you see there's like an object over here. So we're kind of just faking it in that way. It's a bit of a hack, but I think it's a pretty elegant solution to get this effect that we want. And that's it. I hope you found this super helpful and thanks for watching all the way through. I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.